So now that we've talked about Tsarina Katerine, I think it's now time to go into her respective realm of magic, the lore of ice. And this is applicable to all of the ice witches of Kislev. This is their chief lore. This is the big deal with them. You know, the magic of the frost mages, as it's sometimes called. And we will read this little tiny lore blurb here. Jesus, I can never speak. The lore of ice is the magic of the dour frost mages of Kislev, whose blood runs cold in their veins and who can transmute the winds of magic into lethal ice storms with a single gesture. Now, the winds of magic are a little bit different in Kislev. There are winds of magic, yes, those are present, but a lot of the winds of magic, the spirit of the lore of ice, actually comes from the very ground itself, the ice-caked and snow-covered ground of Kislev. So there's always this constant abundance of it for the frost mages and for the ice witches and Katerina herself to utilize. So in today's video, we will talk about those 6 spells in the lore of ice. And they do have some very interesting spells. And one thing to keep in mind here is this book, well, quote-unquote book, the Allied Contingent Kislev, came out way before 6th edition. I'm sorry, way before 8th edition, which is what the majority of Total War Warhammer is based off of. There are some nuances from 7th and 6th in there, but mainly it's from 8th. And lore attributes were in 8th, 7th, and I think some portions of 6th. And lore attributes, as we know, are pretty much the persistent abilities that are always there. Like if we take a look at the Shield of Safri for High Mage, anytime they cast a high magic ability, it gives a ward buff, or ward save buff. So those lore attributes are in every single realm of magic, except for lore of ice, which really didn't get an 8th edition revamp, or 7th edition revamp, or 6th edition revamp for that matter. So it is lacking that. So what we're going to talk about here are those 6 spells and the possibility of a lore attribute. So if I were to think of a lore of ice attribute, I think it would have to apply something to speed. Maybe any spell that is targeted or casted on an enemy has a reduction in speed. Or another thing I thought of was that maybe it gives like a new attribute called brittle, meaning you're more susceptible to either charges do more damage to you, or maybe ranged attacks do more damage to you. Something to the sort that it kind of lends itself to more damage coming in as a sense of like, oh, your bones are so cold and frigid from the multiple abilities that have been cast on you that a stern slap in the face would make your head spin right off. Like something kind of cool like that, very thematic with ice in general. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger is sitting there on the top of a giant mammoth just going, freeze, chill. But that's not going to happen here because there's no mammoths in Kislev, guys. Come on, calm down. Probably on top of a bear. But let's go into some of these spells here. So that's that lore attribute. And if you guys have any comments on what you think that lore attribute would be like, please feel free to, holla at me. Put that in the comment below. I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on that possible lore attribute for the lore of ice. But let's jump into some of these spells here. So the very first one is Shard Storm. Not to be confused with Shart Storm, its dirtier, uglier brother. The caster stretches out her hands and unleashes a torrent of diamond-hard icicles at her foe. This is just strictly a magic missile. This is be in the same vein as, say, a Soul Quench or a Fireball, just something like traveling across the field, does damage on hit. Very low damage, not a high amount of damage. In fact, in tabletop, it does strength 3 hit, so it's quite weak. It attacks about the same strength as a standard elf. So, nothing really crazy to write home about. I would just think that this would be, again, your standard Soul Quench ability where it's just going to shoot some magic missiles downfield and do a little bit of damage, like your Shem's Burning Gaze, something like that. Something nothing to write home about, just kind of a nice little, does damage when I kind of think I need it. Maybe a nice caveat to it is that it would, and here's something I want to say for every ability, because you're going to be sick of me hearing me say this, that I think almost all these would give some form of Frostbite or something like that. I think that's A, thematic. That might even be the lore attribute. But B, I think it's just going to make a lot of sense if, you get stung with Shard Storm, you're going to get a little Frostbite kicking in there. So I think that'd be kind of cool. Or at least something like the Frostworm's Chill aura, something like that. Or even the Frostheart Phoenix. But the other ability here is Freezing Blast. Let's see, this one's kind of cool. I thought there was a lore blurb, there's not for this one. The way that this one works is you target a piece of terrain in tabletop and that terrain freezes over. So anything that's water-based, so rivers, swamps, marshes, or lakes, I want it to kind of be like that in Total War Warhammer, but it's so circumstantial, and the amount of maps that have water on it that do have little marshlands or swamplands is so minimal that Freezing Blast would be such a niche pick that I think it just wouldn't be fun. So I think a really cool way of doing this would just maybe convert it, rather than it being like something that fixes the terrain. Or maybe if you did, it was a wind spell and it froze a patch of terrain that would slow things down as they walked through it. That could be a cool way to do it. But maybe just to make it a cone attack that just kind of uses like Breath of Midnight Wind, where it just does a quick little blast of a frost damage, which might be a little bit different. But the way that this is done in tabletop is very specific to water-based terrain, and it's so circumstantial. Even in tabletop, that's a circumstantial ability. So Shardstorm has the capability in its rule set to say, hey, a wizard can automatically swap one spell for Shardstone if you wish. Basically saying, Shardstorm, we're basically saying, oh, if you get Freeze and Blast and you know you're not going to have any water-based terrain, you can just swap this out for Shardstorm. So that's the kind of be the situation here, is I want Freezing Blast to be something a little bit cooler than just your typical freeze water-based terrain. Maybe it's a really, really small arc, kind of like you see with Scorch for the Skaven. With that might be maybe a little more sense for Freezing Blast. Who knows? It's going to be really dependent on how they want this to happen. The way it works in tabletop is if you cast on a piece of terrain that someone's on, then they take a small no armor save hit against that. So that's the kind of nice little damage portion of it. But I would think Freezing Blast, to make a jump into Total War Warhammer, is going to have a whole entire revamp. Then here's another one. Now I really like this one because this one's very different. It's called Form of the Frost Fiend. The caster metamorphoses into a shrieking, taloned creature of Kislev legend, carried across the battlefield in a whirlwind of purest cold. Now, the Frost Fiend is a kind of a mythological beast. Don't think Yeti, but think Yeti in the terms of, do we know if it exists or not? It does. It's just super up north. I guess you could say Kislev is to Frost Fiends as Treemen are to Athaloran, in the sense that the Treemen are a part of the forest. Frost Fiends are a part of the snow and Kislev as a whole. And they're these large bat-winged beasts with razor-sharp claws. So basically, you can kind of think of it. They're almost like it's not a Terrorgeist. There's another. It's almost like a Vargulf with actual wings, though. So I could actually see the Frost Fiend being a monstrous creature in the Kislev roster, in the same way that Treemen are, or the same way that I'm wont to say bone giants, but the same way Vargulfs are for the vampire count, something like that. Or even a Manticore. Manticore is a really good example of a Frost Fiend. It looks very similar in the sense, it doesn't say it's got the body of a lion, but it does say it's got bat wings, it's a large beast, sharp talons. So we already have the ability for casters to summon a feral Manticore. Well, the Form of the Frost Fiend doesn't summon a feral Frost Fiend, it turns the caster into a Frost Fiend. So this is something that I think would be really, really awesome, because there's no other lore that does this outright, right? There's nothing that completely changes your caster into something, and for the most part kind of locks it down. But it would completely change the stat line of the caster. It would give them a very significant buff to their weapon strength, a very significant buff to their melee attack. It doesn't talk about any buffs to their actual defense. In fact, it says the effects of all equipment, including magic items, steeds, and weapons, are ignored for the duration of this spell, as they are transmogrified along with the caster. And you can cancel it at any time in tabletop. So I'd love to see this as an ability where, okay, you maybe have your lord jumping in on another lord, and they need that extra bit, boom, you pop Form the Frost Fiend, and they can just go to town. Or maybe, it depends really on how they do Form of the Frost Fiend. I would see it as, Frost Fiend itself, I would see it as this kind of anti-infantry AP type role, because it talks about how it like has this shrieking, loud call, and before swooping down and picking something up with its huge talons. Kind of sounds like a harpy, but 10 times bigger. So I'd love to see it probably have some sort of AP characteristic, maybe an anti-infantry characteristic attached to it, if some sort of like killing blows appended to it. But it would be kind of cool to see that the caster could just turn into this giant Frost Fiend, whereas you usually think, oh, this caster's out on its own, I can catch him out and do a significant amount of damage by taking out a high value target. Boom, pops Form of the Frost Fiend, and now that high value target just became a lot more terrifying to whatever you put on it to attack it. So I think that'd be a really, really cool, very different approach to what we typically see in Magic. Moving on here, though, to the Invocation of the Ice Storm. Now, this is a pretty interesting ability. The way it really works is, let me read the lore thing here. Chanting words of power, the wizard summons a harsh blizzard that engulfs enemy marksmen and war machines. So the way this works is in tabletop, you point to a part on the battlefield and you roll a die, and then you make another point in the battlefield, and it's the distance between that 2 points. So it's like, okay, I point here, I roll 2 dice, it's 16. Okay, well, now it's going to move 16 inches from this point to the other point I've just nominated. So what this could be like in Total War Warhammer, and I'm sorry, the effect of this in tabletop is that it anytime a unit wants to fire, they have to do a leadership test with a -2. So that's kind of hard. That's really hard, actually. So all units caught in the ice storm must pass a leadership test at -2 when they wish to shoot, meaning it really cripples them. So what this could be like in Total War Warhammer is something simple, right? You could just have it where it's a negative to accuracy, a minus to their actual ranged attack ability, so they're less likely to even hit, let alone actually score a hit on their target. So I'd really love to see the Ice Storm make an effect here. In the tabletop, though, there's an ability where if you screw up casting it, basically, it affects the entire battlefield, which is terrifying until it's actually dispelled. It lasts for 1 whole turn. The freezing effects of the Ice Storm last for 1 full turn and actually cannot be dispelled in the opponent's next magic phase. So it's kind of rough. It's a pretty rough and tumble ability. So I'd love to see it have some sort of a direct correlation here. Now, the real question is it a targetable ability? Do I just select this one item and that's what it is? Is it a vortex thing that moves around and does damage at the same time? Is it a wind? Is it a not a wind? Oh yeah, I guess a wind ability. The straight line ability, where it affects everything that it touches as it shoots down, and it has a lingering effect for an X amount of time. That's not the way to approach it. I think that this Invocation of the Ice Storm would just be a straight up targetable, just to make it easy. And if you wanted to overcast it, you could cast it in a range, in an area of effect. That way, maybe you could knock out an entire backline's ability to actually bring damage to the fore with the Invocation of the Ice Storm. And I think, again, it's a very unique and different spell. We've seen some spells, like I think Tempest in tabletop actually has an ability that knocks out the ranged effectiveness of archers, and I think that is something that we do need. And I think I even said that back when I was talking about high magic. We need some sort of way to knock out the effectiveness of ranged abilities without actually getting in the back line. I think it's huge. It's a big part of Total War. It's a big part of tabletop, and I think that having magic to negate that would be pretty imperative and pretty huge, and a game changer, definitely a meta changer for once. But let's jump over to the other ability, Midwinter's Kiss. Now this one I definitely see as either a breath ability, a cone ability, or a full wind ability. But let's read this here. The caster breathes a great torrent of purest cold into the ranks of the enemy. Those caught in the blast return to brittle statues of ice within seconds. So basically, you shoot this big blast of Midwinter's wind onto your enemy, and they actually suffer a pretty significant hit, strength 5 hit with no armor save. So what I think would be really cool here is you use this ability kind of in the same way as Malekith's or Dark Magic's, what's it called, like their Frostbite wind attack. So if Midwinter's Kiss, let's say it is a wind attack like that. Well, rather than it just doing like little tiny bit of damage and slowing them down, I think it should just straight up lock them down and do a pretty significant amount of damage. Because Kislev is not going to be this super tanky, like lumbering, slow-moving, heavily armored army. It's going to be a lot of fast attack. You're going to get a lot of shock cavalry, and you're going to get a lot of irregular infantry. When I say irregular, I mean dual-purpose infantry. And I think that that's going to be the crux of Kislev. So they need to rely on a magic lore that helps them lock units down so they can better position themselves. The lore of ice, I think, as a whole, has to be very situational and very circumstantial in the sense that it has to be able to dictate and control the flow of battle, because that's what's going to make Kislev or make or break Kislev on the battlefield, because they need that ability to kind of get around their opponent. So that's what I think would be pretty cool here with Midwinter's Kiss, if it actually does lock them down and do a significant portion of damage. Not like a Fata Buna Net of Amantak combination, because that would be disgusting. I think I'm throwing up at the thought of that. But something along the lines where if it hits them, it does lock them down for just a little bit, if not, a significant amount. And it does do a pretty significant amount of AP damage because no armor saves allowed. So I think it would definitely need to do some sort of heavy AP damage to units, even if it's just a breath attack against, or I'm sorry, a cone attack. Again, I think it still has to have that same moniker attached to it. But our last ability here, Glacial Barrier. And this one is pretty cool. The wizard spreads her hands wide, causing the air itself to freeze into a wall of ice. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It summons up a glacial barrier. A huge glacial barrier. You can't shoot through it. You can't walk through it. You have to charge it and attack it and break it down, or dispel it, or the actual wizard. If they kind of end their channeling of it, as it were, because if they cast on their spell, then it stops the glacial barrier from existing. So how could this come in Total War Warhammer? For one, I just want to see that. I just want to see that ability. Like you have this ability to just basically drop a glacial barrier and completely negate a whole entire flank being attacked. You got your rear being attacked. Maybe you got a whole left side that's got an oblique push onto it. You can kind of shut that down. Or maybe you use it to help you push and funnel people into one direction. I think the Glacial Barrier has a lot of really cool applications. And again, it is entirely different from anything we've seen in any other lore. And I think that the Total War Warhammer 3 lores of Magic have to be different. They can't just be the same shtick. In the same way the Total War Warhammer 2 lores are very different, right? Like when we look at Plague, Ruin, High, Dark, they have a lot of elements of other lores, but they are of themselves very unique. They have a lot of spells that just don't apply to other ones. Like the Dark ability, what's it called? Well, basically it makes your Winds of Magic regenerate faster at the cost of health. I mean, that's really cool. It's unique. Or the ability for High Magic, at least their shield, the lore attribute alone is immensely unique. So you have to kind of start looking at this Total War Warhammer 3 and say, okay, what did they do in 1? Okay, cool. What did they do in 2? Great improvement. 3 has to break that mold. So I think that having something like this that would put a permanent in place for at least a little bit is very different, very game changing, and it could, depending on your micro, could really change the flow of combat. But I hope you guys enjoyed this little foray here down the lore of Ice, guys. It's going to be definitely a very different lore, as I've been saying multiple times now. And I'm really excited to talk more about Kislev in its entirety, because they have a lot of really cool, rich lore. They have a lot of really cool units. I mean, they've got their winged hussars in their Griffin legions and stuff like that, and their winged lancers. So there's a lot of really cool shit with Kislev, and I'm excited to talk more and more and more about it, because we've gone so much into the Ogre Kingdoms that I think it's time to kind of branch out a bit. And we will talk more about Ogre Kingdoms as well. And don't worry, guys, Ogre Kingdoms, Chaos Dwarfs, and Kislev will all get their respective army roster videos like I always do, the big 2-hour-long ones. But I just wanted to really touch on some of these critical points, because we'll be talking and referencing this so much when we talk about the other legendary lores or other portions of Kislev. But as always, guys, thanks for watching here today. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, all that jizzy jazz. But have a good one and take care.